What would you say if someone said life has no inherent meaning? That life is a swirl of both chaos and order, logic and irrationality, suffering and joy, and as human beings, part of this swirl of life, we are subject to the world and life simply as it is, without any preordained purpose from the universe for us to unveil. How would that make you feel? And maybe this question is something you have already been pondering for some time. Perhaps it first came up for you when you read Calvin and Hobbes in your youth and thought about Calvin yelling, "I'm significant, scream the dust speck." Perhaps it began as you recognized the seeming indifference contained within the natural world. Diseases, suffering, cruelty, natural disasters, biological processes. Or perhaps it began with looking at life through a more philosophical lens and coming to think meaning might very well be a human construct, which led you to think maybe meaning might be something you have to create rather than it being something you have to uncover or find. No matter how you first got smacked in the face by this existential reality, it can leave us in a really difficult spot, turning to nihilism or tradition for answers. You know, the if there's no inherent meaning, life must be meaningless. Or the other side where people experience meaning and purpose all the time, therefore there must be a theological explanation for it. Or right about now, you might be thinking, what did I click on? Isn't this supposed to be about goal setting? We're getting there, I promise, but there's a few concepts we need to establish to help us ensure we think about our superordinate goals in an effective way. Without considering the context, we risk setting superordinate goals that are simply inauthentic. Because how you see life and the world is going to impact how you set your superordinate goals, which, as we talked about in the last video in the overview of goal setting, will trickle down to impact, well, everything about your goals and how you experience life potentially. So if you've never thought about your own personal philosophy, well, today we're going to do just a little bit of that in an effort to set the best possible superordinate goals. And at the end of the video, we'll leave you with 5 journal prompts to help you set those high-level goals. And linked in the description below is a summary PDF handout to help you if you're interested, entirely free of charge. Now, if you're wondering what this is all about, what a superordinate goal even is, I recommend you watch the first overview episode of this goal setting series, also linked below. Let's begin. So here we are, firmly placed in an existential crisis. Life has no inherent meaning. There's no preordained purpose waiting for me to discover, but yet I crave meaning and purpose. Kind of like 22 in the movie Soul, when they're trapped in the zone being consumed by the obsession of purpose, but seemingly lacking purpose. But what if an existential crisis is actually exactly what we need and is a tremendous opportunity for setting goals? I think this is the case, and by the end of this video, I hope that you'll share that optimism with me. But before we get there, let's talk briefly about the traps that can distract us from setting authentic superordinate goals. And I know I've personally bounced back and forth around all 3 of these traps over the past decade of my life. So maybe some of you will notice these as well and be familiar with them in your own lives. Trap number 1 is burnout. There's this idea out there that burnout can happen in 2 different ways. There's physical fatigue burnout, where you work so much and so hard without rest, your body literally needs a break in order to address the accumulated fatigue. But then there's a psychological burnout that's kind of independent from physical fatigue. And it's not necessarily depression, melancholy in a way perhaps, but it's being in that place where the thinking is, there's no objective meaning, what I do for work is ultimately going to be meaningless in the end, so why not just numb myself through with alcohol, video games, social media, or some other vice that distracts me from reality. It's this trap of rather than facing the fact meaning isn't there to be unveiled and working through that existential dilemma, it's avoidance, a burnout of purpose. And this can even happen in subtle ways, where you're going through some self-introspection and your phone is right there and it starts getting uncomfortable, so you pick up and scroll. There's lots of little ways that this trap can sneak in. Trap number 2 can be described in a couple of different ways. Consumerism, deep immersion into yourself, into career, into culture. But it's not hard to find examples of this trap in real life. Just turn on any social media platform and scroll for a little while. It's a doubling down on consumerism, status symbols, narcissistic personal growth, job promotions. It's being an active fuel to the consumerist capitalist society and turning off that part of your brain that thinks maybe it should all mean something more than this. Go to work, earn money, go home, spend money. Repeat till death. Avoid deeper meaning, live on the surface, pump your own tires, and when you can't, seek validation from others to do it for you. Again, like the burnout example, it's an avoidance of true meaning. Lastly, trap number 3 is tradition and adopting others' creations of meaning. Now, we need to tread carefully here because there can be circumstances when tradition and being a member of a group does reflect one's true authentic meaning, and setting superordinate goals with the aim of furthering engaging with that tradition or group makes for a well-lived life. Totally fair. But this isn't always the case. Some great thinkers throughout time might see some people out there using this as yet another way of avoiding engaging with life authentically. It can happen by convincing yourself of what you want to be true because life would just be easier if it was true. Stick your head in the sand, never leave the echo chamber, do whatever mental gymnastics you need to do to have this tradition or tribal identity answer all of your questions for you. Become heavily religious, join a cult, pledge your allegiance to an ideology, go full-blown ancestral living. Take off your shirt, eat raw meat, avoid basic preventative medicine and hygiene because that's what our ancestors did during the better times of dying of, an infected toenail. But don't forget to film it on your iPhone. The point here being that this trap is letting someone else paint a picture of some ideal for you and saying you are virtuous and will find meaning by coming over here. Join us in our pursuit of this ideal that will relieve all your suffering and provide you with meaning so you don't have to worry about it anymore. I got you. I know what's best for you. Yet again, it's having something else solve the problem of there being no inherent meaning for you. You might be noticing the underlying issue happening here. If there's no inherent meaning, it can be easier than we might think to fall into the trap of thinking there's just no point or letting someone else decide what's meaningful on our behalf. But either way, this can leave a feeling of emptiness or meaningless conformity that prevents us from fully engaging with life. And if we are in one of those traps, and we are looking for avoidance and we set superordinate goals, they're just going to exacerbate the problem or leave us feeling empty as we make progress in the direction towards something that isn't actually meaningful to us. That's why it's so important to consider these things before we get into setting our superordinate goals. But it doesn't have to be like this. Instead, by doing the hard work of self-reflection and working on our self-awareness around our values and what can allow us to create meaning in our lives, we can be in a place where setting superordinate goals can have a higher chance of making our lives feel more meaningful and fulfilling. If there's no inherent meaning to life, instead of falling into a nihilistic mentality of therefore there's just no meaning, period, and instead of pursuing meaning that's been created by someone else, a packaged universal purpose cloaked in religion, tradition, or ideologies, you can embrace this as freedom. No inherent meaning might just mean that you have the freedom, and many would argue the responsibility, to create your own meaning and values. To discover what you truly believe is important, meaningful, and fulfilling, and to consider what is an authentic expression of you. And this is obviously easier said than done. Those traps can be sneaky, and it can be hard not to be influenced by culture and those around us or those online when we start to think about what an authentic life could look like for ourselves. And for good reason. A lot of our experience of life is reliant on how others perceive and engage with us. But if we try our best to take a step back for this goal-setting process, it can be helpful. And it might be clear now how this relates to setting superordinate goals. When we set superordinate goals, often someone will give you a list of values and ask you to pick what resonates with you, which is great. But if we don't stop to consider what might be influencing our choices, what might be causing us to choose the word on the page that is inauthentic, without the self-reflection and careful examination of our options, we might mindlessly pick a value that is simply part of one of those traps we talked about. And there's one last thing we need to consider before we get into the journaling prompts and recommendations for how to go about setting authentic superordinate goals. With great freedom comes great responsibility. We've likely all heard that before, and many great thinkers throughout history have highlighted this idea in regard to how we create and understand our authentic meaning and values and what actions we take as a result. Now, we don't have time to go through all of the considerations and perspectives on this matter, and if that's something that you would find interesting, let me know and we can further expand on it in future videos. But I'd like to share one with you from one of, if not my overall, favorite philosopher of all time, Simone de Beauvoir. Now, forgive me because if it's not obvious already to you, I'm not formally trained in philosophy, so I might butcher this. But in very simple terms, Simone de Beauvoir might pause us in this moment and have us consider something very important about what exactly we are before we go about setting our superordinate goals. She might say something like, yes, be careful of conforming to societal norms and adopting false but nicely packaged, appealing values from others. But also remember that you are not just an individual. You are both individual and part of a group. You are both individual and a member of your family. Both individual and a member of your community. Both individual and a part of nature itself. Both subject and object. Both individual and a part of something more, and you oscillate between these two sources of being all the time. And because of that, it's important to consider how your authentic expression and creation of meaning integrates with others. What responsibility do you have to others? Be it your family, community, or other group that you're a part of that make up the non-individual part that is also you. If authentic expression produced by this freedom is how someone achieves a meaningful and fulfilling existence, how can you both satisfy that and contribute to helping others achieve this who might be experiencing external constraints and oppression or those traps we talked about before, keeping them from being free and authentic? She might say, we need to remember that if we are both individual and part of a collective, if the other individuals who are also a part of that collective don't recognize and express their own authentic meaning and values, then a part of you, the you that is a member of this community, will never fully be able to be free and authentic either. This is an important concept to consider as we begin to set our superordinate goals. We have a responsibility to others, which ultimately includes ourselves, to express our authenticity in a way that is ethically directional to liberating others to express their authenticity. Okay, if you've made it this far, I applaud you, and I hope what we've discussed so far has set the stage for how to best consider these journal prompts. And I hope they help you discover what superordinate goals are aligned with you. If by the end of spending some time with these prompts, you're still not sure, that's okay. This is an ongoing process, and sometimes it ends with a superordinate goal of figuring out my authenticity, and that's completely okay. Now, each of these prompts has a few questions and reflections built into the prompt to help us think carefully about our responses. The first journal prompt is designed to help us consider who we are as a sense of being rather than a doing. It's meant to help us consider our presence, self-awareness, and inner fulfillment rather than productivity, external tasks, and societal expectations related to achievement. Prompt number 1. How have the pressures of hyperproductivity, self-optimization, or the demands of society influenced your goals and actions in the past? Reflect on where you have fallen into the trap of performing authenticity for others rather than truly living it. In what ways can you slow down, embrace stillness, and create space for contemplation and cultivate a more serene and meaningful life? Now, this isn't to say you can't pursue productivity, right? Like, this isn't a dualistic thing. Rather, it's to help us consider the part of being that isn't productivity and external validation of success. The point of this prompt is to consider where you've been inauthentic in your pursuits, falling into the trap of letting society dictate what success and meaning are to you, and considering how you can create space for self-reflection and awareness so you can better avoid those traps we discussed and can recognize when they're starting to creep in. The second prompt encourages us to reflect on experiences that can provide us with insight into where we've already experienced the ingredients for meaning. Prompt number 2. What situations, events, or experiences have caused you to experience extreme emotions, anger, sadness, happiness, or excitement that you could feel in your bones and that overflowed into your experience of life as a whole? Reflect on how those experiences might help you understand what's important to you. Emotions can be fickle, but they're also a very important part of life. Robotic stoicism sounds, frankly, terrible and unhuman to me. This prompt encourages us to consider moments that sparked extreme emotions because just beneath the surface, with a little bit of analysis, those moments can contain the ingredients for meaning, insight into what's important to us and why. The third prompt is about considering that other part of our being, the non-individual part, and thinking about how that can contribute to these superordinate goals. Prompt number 3, reflect on how your choices impact not only your life, but the lives of those around you. What high-level goals will allow you to authentically assert your own freedom while also affirming the dignity and agency of others? From your perspective, what does a life of moral integrity and consistent ethical action look like? Now, we don't have time to get into morals and ethics, but one way to think about this, it can just be an easier way of thinking about your personal code of ethics, is to think of what is unethical and immoral to you, and then try to think of what the opposite would be. Why is that thing unethical to you, and what would it look like if it were ethical instead? How do ethics contribute to how you view your life in relation to others' lives? If it's something that's interesting to you, we can go down the rabbit hole of considering ethics and goal setting. Like, for example, do you have an ethical obligation to set goals focused on improving your health? Let me know. We can open that can of worms if people are interested. But the point of this prompt is to truly consider how to balance the authentic expression of you as an individual and you as a member of a group, and how to go about that ethically and aligned with your moral code. Prompt number 4 is designed to help us think about what is preventing us from creating meaning in our lives and how we can set goals to help us overcome those barriers. Prompt number 4, what would it mean for you to overcome your current limitations and rise above the conventional values of society? Consider what ideals or visions of the future compel you to grow and transform, and what limitations might keep you from asserting yourself towards that future. Consider your deepest values and passions. How can you assert your freedom and responsibility in shaping your future, knowing that meaning is something you must create for yourself? This is the prompt that sparks us to consider where personal growth and development might fit into this overall picture. And lastly, prompt number 5 is short and sweet, but contains a lot to consider. Prompt number 5, what aim, based on your true values and ethics, can you strive for, but always fail at forever? The key being, you can never actually achieve the thing. Failing allows you to see your limitations, which allows you to set goals to overcome those limitations, always in progress, always in the direction of something authentic to you, always in the state of creating meaning and purpose. And since you know it's not something you're actually going to accomplish, the journey is the whole point. Those are the prompts. And I know this can seem a bit conceptual and detached from real life, but the thing is when we truly sit with these things and consider them, it's actually the opposite. It allows us to fully, authentically engage with real life. Spending some time with our head in the clouds might be exactly what's required for the sky to clear, allowing us to see the forest through the trees, allowing us to truly enjoy the journey walking amongst the trees around us. And for what it's worth, a couple of things that have helped me greatly in thinking about these prompts is to remember that our thoughts and responses to these questions are not static, but rather will change and grow as our situation changes and as we as people change and grow. And it's okay if we don't know for sure, or if we accidentally insert the influence or judgments of our families or friends into our responses, or if we realize once we get going on actionable goals down the road that this isn't truly meaningful and we need to backtrack. This is a journey, not a test question that will be right or wrong. It's chaotic and beautiful and maybe a little confusing and overwhelming at times. It's life. Lastly, I know for me, what's helped is journaling through these prompts and then trying to set 1 or 2, but preferably just one superordinate goal that encompasses the theme or underlying state of being that is uncovered through these journal prompts. If you'd like, and if you think it would be helpful, I can do a complimentary video to this that walks through the process of how I would go about turning these prompts into a superordinate goal. I hope this helps you set some superordinate goals, and if you're okay sharing, I would absolutely love to hear what they are for you. I'm intentionally not giving any examples right now because I would love for you to go through this And without outside influence, just think about these things, journal, and see what comes up for you, because you might not need any examples to relate to. You might just naturally uncover a theme or some sort of subjective high-level goal that's really fitting for you. And if when you go through that, if you do set a superordinate goal and you're comfortable sharing, I would love to hear it. So let me know either in the comments, on social media, or however you'd like to reach out. And again, in the description box below is a link to a PDF, totally free of charge, but that does have a donation button connected to it if you wish to say thank you in that way, that has these prompts and some extra points to help you work through these. Next time, we'll look at how to take these superordinate goals and turn them into intermediate goals and how a needs analysis can help us do that. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to chatting with you all again soon.